Dr. V!
Well, how can I help you, Chuck?
So I was working on those movable chords that you taught us last time, and I'm having a hard time making them sound good. Well, playing bar chords can be tricky. So let's see if we can troubleshoot a little bit and see if we can solve the problem. Well, that would be great! Before we talk about the specifics of playing a bar, let's back up a little bit and just think about what does it take to get a good sound when you press a string. So typically, I recommend that we play just behind the fret wire, because all that really needs to take place here is that the string has to be bent and secured over the fret wire. Now, it doesn't take a lot of pressure to do that. In fact, it takes almost no pressure, very, very little, to get a good sound. You don't have to squeeze all the way down to the fingerboard to get a good sound. All you have to do is secure it over the fret wire. Certainly, if you didn't have enough pressure, you would get a buzzy sound. Now, more likely, if you get further away from the fret, you might get that buzzy sound. And then you have to squeeze harder there to get a good sound. So it's generally a good idea to use the tip of the finger bone right behind the fret wire. Now, I said finger bone, didn't I? That's right. The bone is the hard surface that actually moves the string in the direction that you want it. So if you play on the very tip of your finger bone, you're going to have that direct energy into the string, therefore a little easier to press. Now, if you were to press on this flat part of the surface, that's a little bit more spongy, and so the string just kind of indents into that flesh before it actually hits that bone. So it's not so direct in terms of energy. It's much better to play on the very tip of your finger bone. You can also end up getting a very muffly sound if you play right over the fret. So if you're doing that, that could also be the source of a problem when you're playing your bar chords. So now let's be a little more specific about making a bar. So thinking about the concepts that we just discussed, what happens if I take my bar and I place it, I don't know, far away from the fret? Not a lot of success there. Okay, now what happens if maybe I'm angled like this? Ooh, I got almost a good sound here, but not so great there. So in this angle, part of my finger is touching the fret wire and muffling out. So what happens if I go this way? So this one sounds good. Well, none of the rest of them sounded very good, and this, right? So we only got the second string sounding okay on that one. And again, it's because I'm angled. I'm hitting the fret over here. I'm really far away from here. I'm hitting the fret right here. There's a lot of reasons why this is not sounding good. Now I'm going to try it a different way. I'm going to press all 6 strings down, and I'll be right behind the fret wire. Still having problems. What's going on with that? Well, what I just did is I played with the flat surface of the finger. And here at the flat surface of the finger, there's a lot of cushion here, right? And remember we talked about it's the finger bone itself that moves the string to the fret. So what we want to have is more direct contact with the finger bone. Well, this is kind of cushiony here. The side of the finger, however, that's where you have better contact with the finger bone. Now, it just so happens to work to our advantage that we're made this way. When you curl your fingers, you'll see that your index finger leans inward. So when you go to the guitar, that same principle is in place. So use the left side of your finger to make contact with the strings. Now, I'm sure you're expecting this to sound great. Let's see what happens. Not quite. Still had a problem. So next thing you have to think about is the way your finger is made. Now, this is extremely individual. All of us have different lengths of fingers, and no one solution works for everybody. This is where you have to be very, very careful about the way that you use your finger, and it's going to be a little different from person to person. When we look at our finger, you'll see these joint indentations. So like here, if I bend this joint, there's an indentation here. This tip joint right here, there's an indentation right there. Or even here, there's an indentation. If an indentation lies across the string, it's more likely to muffle. So what we have to do is we have to find a spot along the length of your finger so that you are not playing with these indentations. So sometimes if you have a muffly sound, it's simply because a joint indentation is over a string. What's the solution? You can either extend your finger or move it the other way to get off of those indentations. See how that works? Now, the other thing that's pretty cool about bars and bar chords is that most of the time we don't need to put pressure on all 6 strings. For example, if I play a major chord form, I only need to put pressure with the bar on the 6th string, the 2nd string, and the 1st string. So if I put these 3 fingers here and I lay my bar across here, all I need really is the 6th, 2nd, and 1st string. And I don't really need any pressure from the bar here. Now I can do this. Watch this. I'm going to lift these 3 fingers and I'm going to play those three strings, the 5th, 4th, and 3rd string. I'm not putting really any pressure here, but I am putting pressure on the 6th string, the 2nd, and the 1st. And I put this here. This is what we call an arced bar. So if you look here, there's an arc in my finger. You can actually see that. Now at this point, I'm on the side of my finger where that finger bone is, and it's covering the 1st and 2nd strings. And then I have the tip of my finger over here covering the 6th string. So arc bars are a wonderful way to minimize the tension that it takes to press a bar down. Try it out. I got it! Well, I'm glad that helped. And as always, happy practicing.
Hi, my name is Michael Ibsen. Today I'm going to share a little lesson on thinking polyphonically on the guitar. And what I mean by polyphonically or polyphony is multiple voices happening at the same time. Probably something you're already familiar with to some extent. And this is a really important part of playing solo classical guitar music because our instrument actually attempts to fill that polyphonic role of playing, bass and melody and sometimes a 3rd or 4th voice in there as well. So there are actually a lot of technical challenges for us as guitarists playing polyphony. Our instrument has issues with maintaining voices, also with controlling articulations and stopping voices. But I actually think that these things are some of the most important things we can do as guitarists to improve our performances of the music we love. Because when people hear a piece of music, especially a solo guitar or solo classical guitar piece of music, they're actually listening for those voices whether they realize it or not. And many players actually don't necessarily learn the skills needed to emphasize that aspect of the music, that aspect of multiple voices. It's something that I kind of think more of us could focus on, because if you actually communicate the polyphony of the piece well in a musical way, it can come across a lot more convincing to a listener, even if you're maybe not at 100% technically playing the piece, which is not an excuse to have bad technique, but just that some of this stuff is actually even more important in many cases than playing the fastest or with the best technique ever. So I'm just going to go over a few ways that I think we can improve our understanding of polyphony in guitar pieces and then how we apply it to the instrument. So the first example I want to go over today is from this piece, Dreams by Sergio Assad. And there's this section in the middle, this molto espressivo section, starting here, I'm going to mark it for you, going until here, where I think that I can show a really clear example of how this polyphony is important. So I'm going to play this section with more or less equal emphasis on all the notes, and you can hear how that will sound. Aside from my little mistake, sounds okay. Now I'm going to show you if I really emphasize the melody, which you can see in the top line here. First I'll play the melody on its own. So... It's kind of an odd melody, but if I really bring that out, you'll hear how much of a difference that makes to the musical interpretation of the piece. So you can already hear a big difference hearing that da, 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 the long line. This is another problem actually we have as guitarists, is that when we play a note, the sound decays very quickly. So, you know, part of the issue with playing polyphonically on the guitar is that we have to almost overemphasize the differences between the voices, or whether it's color or dynamic, because, you know, I often use the metaphor of like stage makeup. You know, when someone's playing in a play, they do sort of extreme levels of makeup, or when they enunciate words on stage as an actor, they say the words really clearly so that the audience, who's far away in the, you know, maybe 5-10 meters away in the audience, hears what they're doing even clearer, because over that distance some of that's lost. And the same thing is true of performing music. You know, we might feel like we're doing a big dynamic difference, but the audience doesn't necessarily catch that. So actually overemphasizing sometimes will allow for your ideas to come across clear. And we have an added challenge in the fact that our instrument doesn't have as big of a dynamic range as like the piano or even the violin. So, you know, the difference between our hardest note and our softest note is already pretty subtle. So, you know, we're going to go over more of that as we go forward, especially in the second half of this, but that's just giving you some context of why I think this sort of polyphonic attention to polyphony is so important. So first I want to talk about, you know, how do we detect that polyphony is happening, that it's in the piece we're playing. So the first clue is stem direction. Now you can see in this piece that the melody I pointed out is all notated with the stems upwards, right? You can see all of this here. So that's a really good clue, and most composers, if they're intending for a voice to be, you know, a melodic motif, will have the stem direction differently, in a different direction than, for example, the bass. And that's very handy. That's not always the case. So sometimes you have to be a little bit careful when you're looking at a score. Has it been arranged by somebody who wasn't being particularly careful with stem direction? Did the composer make a mistake, or the publisher make a mistake from, you know, taking the manuscript and translating it to a published edition? You never really know for sure, so it's always best also to trust your ear, but the stem direction is a really good place to start. And another good example of this that I want to show is this little study by Tárrega in C major. And here, it's not necessarily communicated with stem direction, but with these accents you can see above these notes. So if you look at those accents, you think, why are those accents there? And then you play those notes, you see that they form a little melody within an arpeggiated texture. So the first line sounds like this. Now I emphasize that melody, E, G, E, like it was written, but if I played it without emphasizing, it would be like this. Still sounds nice, but it sounds a lot more convincing and a lot clearer what Tárrega meant if, and you hear that melody much clearer, if I make the middle, especially the middle part of the arpeggios, much softer. So it's going to sound like this then. So you can just hear it's much clearer, it sounds more beautiful, and we're not kind of lost in hearing too many notes. So that's another example of how I might notice that there's a polyphonic element going on. And this I would call like deceptive polyphony, because it's not actually totally clear from the notes themselves. It is from this accent. But when you look at this texture, just on surface level, you might think, oh, it's just an arpeggio. I play arpeggios all the time. It's just that. But then you realize that there's this little melody buried in there, which is very beautiful. And so as a player, it makes playing the piece more fun too, because it's not just a C major arpeggio anymore. I have this cool melody going on over top of it. So that's just another example of how you can kind of detect, and sometimes it's more obvious. Like if we look at this Sor, little piece by Fernando Sor, Andantino, you can see really clearly here these bass notes, they're lasting for the whole measure. It's obvious that we have two voices, bass and melody. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back next week with another video on how thinking polyphonically affects choosing fingerings. See you next time.
Today we're going to talk about scales and cadences. You may know cadences as groups of chords, and that is all they are. So let's take some of the mystery out of that. What got me thinking about this for my guitar students and for all of us guitarists is that I've always heard pianists practicing. They don't just practice their scales. When they're practicing their scales, you hear something like this. So they've got this little secret pattern they do with chords at the end. What's that all about? Let's dissect it a little bit, okay? I'm going to ask you to do something that's not just memorizing a group of numbers, because you've heard some numbers before. Like, I know this because when I ask students, can you tell me what the primary chords are in any given key? Sometimes you've played enough in those keys that you do know the chord, the primary chords. But other times there's confusion and students will say, I do know, it's 1, 3, 5. But 1, 3, 5 is not the formula to figure out the primary chords. That's for the notes within a chord. So it can be confusing. So I want you to have something that is so effective, you're never going to forget again if you remember to use it. And that is your hand. Okay, so we're going to count our fingers. 1. Oh, please do it exactly the way I do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we just touched these two, but we shook 1, 4, and 5. So that's the important thing that helps us, is that we have that memory of these fingers moving. And so from then on, if you think about your scales, you'll think about those fingers and you'll be able to figure out the cadence if you do forget. So key of C, this is where we started. We start with the key of C because it is the one that has no sharps and no flats. Let's not get all involved with that right now. We'll just learn how to play it. And we're learning first position, even though there's great systems of scales that you're working on, I'm sure, because learning in first position forces you to actually know the notes you're playing. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So when you play it up here, you don't really, you could do it here and think you're playing in the key of C, but oops. Anyway, so, and if we do our C, D, E, F, G, C, F, and G. So we'll practice it with this. Okay. So I'm advocating for guitarists to always practice the cadence when you're practicing the scale. So after C, if you follow the circle of fifths around, the next one is G. G has 1 sharp, that's F sharp. So we're going to play G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And what would those chords be? G, A, B, C, D. G, C, and D. Okay, where are we going next? We're going to the next stop on the circle of fifths, and that would be D. D major keeps the F sharp from the key of G, and it adds 1 of its own, which, by the way, the sharp is always the second to last note of the scale. So I'll show you what I mean. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So now what are those chords? D, E, F sharp, G, A. D, G, and A? Really? Yep, That's it. Okay. And now we'll take another step around the circle and we end up on the A. So the A keeps the F, the C sharp from the previous keys, and what's the second to last note in the key of A? Well, what comes before A? G. So that would be G sharp. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. And what are the chords? A, D, E. A, D, and E. Okay, one more. The next stop after the key of A is 4 sharps, and that's the key of E. It takes the 3 sharps from the key of A and it adds the second to last note, the thing that comes before E, which is a D. So D sharp and E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. And the chords are E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B. And for any one of the five chords of the key, which is, you could do a 7th chord if you like. So now, which ones did we work on now? We did C, we did G, we did D, we did A, and we did E. If you just look at the letters, C, G, D, A, and E, it's a word scramble for the word caged. And that is where we're going with this in a next session. And that would be to associate the those 5 scale forms that go with the C, G, D, A, and E, and be able to move them anywhere along the neck. So, but the first stopping place is to make sure that we start associating all those scale forms with their cadences. So, have fun working with that, and we'll see you again soon.
Hey everyone, how is it going? My name is John and thank you so much for tuning in to my segment on GFAtv. In this video, I want to talk to you about how to work on your scales in a way that's going to hopefully help you develop speed and accuracy. Anyway, let's get started. So one of the many mistakes that people make when they go and try to practice their scales, usually to develop speed, is that they take the metronome and try to go up little by little, getting it faster and faster. Now, even though this might help them get their scales faster, in my experience, it doesn't always work that well because they end up getting faster, but very slowly. So in this video, what we're going to do instead is we're going to keep the metronome the same speed, nice and slow, but we're going to change the grouping of the notes. So to start us off, let's do simple quarter notes at a nice slow speed like 66. Also in this example, we're going to use the very common C major scale and we're going to use the Segovia left-hand fingerings. Now if you're not familiar with that though, the music for this is going to be posted on the screen in just a moment. Okay, so now even though that might seem slow, it's super important when you start your scales off for the day to practice slow. This way your fingers can remember what it feels like to make contact with the string and you can get the sound and the technique that you want. Anyway, once you've done that, let's go ahead and hop over to eighth notes and do the exact same thing, but now in eighth notes. So a little faster. Okay, so by now you might be thinking, isn't this supposed to help me get faster? Right now we're doing speeds that I can do pretty comfortably. How is this going to help me get faster? And to that I say, hold on just one more grouping because we're almost there. The next grouping we're going to do is going to be a dotted eighth followed by a 16th note. And that sounds something like this. So what you might notice is happening with this grouping is that some of the notes are much closer together now. Not all of them, but some of them. So now to get the ones that weren't close together and that one close together, we're going to do the same exact thing, but we're going to switch it. We're going to do a 16th followed by a dotted eighth, and that's going to sound like this. Okay, so we're finally starting to get a little bit faster. This is where the speed starts to come in. We're going to stick to the same idea, but instead of doing a 16th note, we're going to follow it by two 30-second notes. So we're going to do a dotted eighth, followed by two 30-seconds. And that would sound like this. Okay, so now we're finally starting to get some speed. Now to do the same exact thing we just did before, we're going to do the same exact thing, but flip it and do two 30-second notes, followed by a dotted eighth note. Okay, so by now I think you're starting to see how we can use this to develop speed, right? We're taking smaller sections of things that we know how to do, but doing them at a much faster speed than we can do them all at once. This way our fingers learn how to move this quickly, but only at small amounts at a time. Now we have one, I guess kind of two groupings left, and that's going to be an 8th note followed by 16th note triplets. That's going to sound like this. And now here's the exact same thing, but flipped in reverse. Alright, so that's some ways to start building up your scale speed in a different way than just going faster and faster. Now what I would recommend to do is do this on multiple scales, as well as working on this with free stroke and rest stroke. We did rest stroke in this video, but do it with free stroke as well. And also do it playing staccato. Even though today we mostly played it legato, practicing staccato is going to be another great way to work on the touch of the finger, making contact with the string. Now you can go ahead and take the same idea and apply it to any scale-like passage in any piece or study that you're playing, which is actually what I would highly recommend to do, because it's going to make things a lot easier when you do start wanting to boost it up speed-wise. Alright, so thanks again for watching, and I hope that you found this helpful. Now, go out and practice some scales, and then go make some music. See you next time.